Hi, I'm Sifferman. I'm the creator of physicalliving.com, where I teach health first fitness and physical culture to my readers around the world. This video, I'm going to teach you the correct way to perform the basic push-up exercise. There's a lot of different kinds of push-ups out there, and this is going to be the most basic version, just your typical standard military style push-up. I'm going to be going over a lot of the subtle nuances to the technique to help you not only maximize your performance and your results and the benefits you receive from doing this exercise, but also to help you prevent yourself from doing it incorrectly and injure yourself in the process. I've seen a lot of people doing push-ups in not necessarily incorrect ways, but in less efficient ways, and over time, over hundreds and thousands of repetitions spread out over several weeks and months, that will produce some wear and tear on your body, and usually results in a shoulder injury or something similar. So I'm going to demonstrate a few repetitions just to begin, and then I'm going to walk you through all the various coaching points. Please follow along as we go so that you can internalize this and just practice at your own pace. So let me just demonstrate a few repetitions using what I guess we could call optimal technique, an efficient technique. Show you from the front. So that was just a demonstration. Now let's go through all of the various points to consider. First one is hand positioning. Very important. The positioning of your hands is going to create a chain reaction in how your body pushes yourself away from the ground. So you want your hands to be placed directly underneath your shoulders and directly underneath your elbows. You want to make a pillar with these three joints, your wrists, your elbow, and your shoulder on both sides. You can go a little wider if necessary, but the more vertical you get, the more efficient your platform is going to be for pressing into the ground. I mean, if you go really wide, not only is that going to put more strain on your shoulder joints, it's also going to decrease or increase the leverage required to press off the ground. Pressing from a real wide push-up, and this is a different exercise, a different type of push-up, doesn't necessarily mean it's a worse exercise, but it is a less efficient movement. So we're not doing push-ups in this way today. But when you press off from this really wide angle, you're pressing at an angle, diagonally into the ground with both arms, trying to support your torso with this arch of the arms spreading. And that diagonal force is not as efficient as a vertical force is, which is why you want your hands placed directly underneath your shoulder joints. Now, this might be uncomfortable. So depending on your circumstances, depending on your body type, play around with it. It's okay to go a little wider. Just know that the more you deviate from this, the more that you are increasing the amount of effort required to perform the repetitions in the long term. So we want to work up to this. So and there's a reason for this, because as we get into the repetitions, it involves where your elbow tracks during the actual push-up exercise. Now, I guess before we go anywhere any further, it's important to understand that all of these coaching points are based on your ability to hold the top position of the push-up with good technique. Not sagging, not a bucking bronco, but be able to hold this. And what is this? This is essentially a plank, a top of push-up position plank, or a plank with your elbows locked. And you should be able to create that structure with your body throughout the entire range of motion of the exercise. And if you can't do that, then you need to work on that before you start working on push-ups, because you're going to increase your risk of injury if you're trying to progress to an exercise that is beyond your current ability to maintain under control with good technique. So if you haven't already mastered the plank exercise, the elbow plank, or the top of push-up position plank, work on that first before we get into all these nitty-gritty details, which aren't really going to apply to you if you can't already perform the basics. And it's okay if you can't. It just means that in this exercise you're not at that level yet, and you might need to work on that. So we've already covered hand positioning. We're also going to look at elbow alignment, particularly in the top position and during the movement itself. So when we're in the top of push-up position here, you want your elbows rotated externally so that your elbow pits are facing forwards. So if I'm pointing this direction, I'm going to rotate my elbows until they lock so that my elbow pits are facing in front of me. And there's a reason for this, because if you don't get that full elbow lock, you're not going to be training the full range of motion. And you're going to put yourself at risk of developing scar tissue called adhesions or joint calcifications, joint salts in your elbow joint, and you don't want that. You want to strengthen the entire range of motion every repetition, and that doesn't mean forcefully locking out your elbows every single rep, but it does mean achieving that full range of motion every rep and making sure that your elbows do in fact lock. And there's myths surrounding this that you shouldn't lock your elbows, it's bad for your elbows. It's only bad for your elbows if you have pre-existing conditions in your elbows. If you have elbow tendonitis or have had it in the past, then you want to proceed with this cautiously, always under the guidance of your doctor, of course. Not a doctor, I don't know your situation. If you have structural issues, you need to take that into account in your training program. And if you can't work around this and the push-up just isn't exercise frequentness, then that's fine. There's plenty of other exercises out there. But when you're in the top of push-up position, you want to make sure that those elbow pits are rotated forward. And you almost think about pressing into the ground and corkscrewing your hands into the ground to rotate that elbow around. And that'll help you get that full elbow extension. Now that's the top of position, keeping them pointed forward. During the range of motion itself, you want to keep those elbows pointed in the same direction, but as you're descending and ascending, you want to keep your elbows tucked in tight into your rib cage. And there's a reason for this. A lot of people do their push-ups out here. See how my elbows are flaring out? That's not just a weaker position. It's not just a higher risk position for your shoulder, for your elbows. It's also a less efficient and a poor alignment position. You think about the push-up. What are we doing? We're pushing in front of us, right? And if you're going to be pushing something really heavy, like moving a car or whatever, you're pushing something really heavy, you're not going to push from way out here, are you? You're going to be much weaker out here. You're going to push in real tight. And we want to do this when we're doing the push-up exercise itself. And so what we do is we keep our elbows tucked in tight into our ribs so that as we're pressing or lowering ourselves down, our elbows and the insides of our arms are actually going to be sliding almost against your ribs if you can. And this depends on your body type. You might have really wide shoulders, so it might not happen exactly. But the main point is to keep your elbows in tight during the range of motion. And that's not only going to contribute to better force production, more strength potential, and ultimately more repetitions, it's also going to put your elbow and shoulder joints in a much safer position. So you'll be able to train this for much longer because you'll be at a much lower risk of muscle strain or pull or tear or a joint injury. So that's elbow positioning, very important. Shoulder positioning, also very important. One of the number one mistakes that I see with people doing push-ups is that their shoulders are not packed down on their rib cage. Their shoulders aren't stabilized, is another way of saying that. They have these shoulders that, you might be able to see from the side. I wish I had a whole camera crew and production staff for my videos, but I don't. But you'll see that my shoulder blades are kind of like riding up, and I don't have a packed position, and my shoulders might be up by my ears. And you can tell, it hurts, it's uncomfortable. That's why people are like, yeah, push-ups, I'm doing a real good job. And you can tell on their face they're not really enjoying themselves. It's because it hurts. And you want to make sure, to prevent that, to keep your shoulders packed down in your rib cage. And you do that by, even just right now, you can practice. Hold your hands up in front of you, and you're going to pull your shoulders downward onto your ribs. And if you do it just, if it's not making sense, just with your arms at your side, reach your hands down on the outsides of your thighs, pulling down with your shoulders. It's the opposite of a shoulder shrug, the opposite motion. So you're actually pulling the shoulders down. And you want to model that when you're in the push-up position, because what this does is it stabilizes your shoulder joint and it connects the force that you're creating by pushing into the ground. It connects that force into your entire body. So you're not going to leak any force, any movement at your shoulder joint. The force that you produce by pushing into the ground is going to be directly translated into the rest of your body, which is what you want. Because you're not just performing a tricep and shoulder exercise. The push-up is a full body exercise. It's arm and shoulder centric, but it's a full body exercise. I'm not going to get into all that. We don't have time. I'm already taking long enough as it is. So keeping your shoulders packed every single repetition. So let me just demonstrate that. So that's a very important point, and that will probably feel different if you've never done that before. The next important point is your spinal alignment, and this is usually referred to in exercise technique tutorials as, keep a flat back, don't let your hips sag, and that's all good advice, but it's not very specific, or it could be more specific. If you want to get the most out of every single repetition, then you want to think about lengthening your spine in both directions, and you do that in two ways. One, in combination with that shoulder pack, which is indirectly going to help you lengthen your spine. You also want to be lifting away with your head, lifting away from your body. So you're lifting this way, as if a cord was attached to the crown of your head and pulling it directly away, just like a puppet, for example. And so you want to be reaching your head in that direction. It's a very common mistake to look up at a clock or just raise your head, and especially as you get to the bottom, you might be afraid of hitting your chin, crane your neck back. You want to avoid that. Keep your neck in a neutral position, reaching away if you can think about that. You're not going to be able to think about all these individual points, obviously, but you can rehearse them, at the beginning of a set or on a certain repetition. You can just think, okay, yeah, lengthen the neck, pack the shoulders, keep the elbows in tight. And you can go through these as you're doing every set, because you're never going to have a perfect repetition every single time, because we never move perfectly, but we can approximate perfection. There I go again, getting to that training philosophy and nonsense. So where were we? Long spine. So you're reaching with your neck, keeping the shoulders packed down. Now, in combination with that spinal alignment, we're not just keeping a straight back. We're not just avoiding the bucking broncho and the sagging hips. We're actually reaching the tailbone in the opposite direction. We do that with a slight abdominal contraction and a slight glute contraction, which actually, if we were standing, it would tuck the tailbone slightly underneath. And this is just a real athletic power position where you can transfer force, between your core and your legs, or vice versa. And this is also present in the plank exercise, obviously. But it's really important that you do this with your push-ups, because this is really where you tie everything together and make this a full body exercise, is with that reaching the spine in the opposite direction, using the abdominal contraction, the glute contraction, and a slight tailbone tuck. So you're lengthening your spine. A long spine is a strong spine. It's good to remember that. Now the last major point is leg drive. We're not just balancing on top of our feet here. We're actually driving our feet backwards, driving our heels backwards, resting on our ball of foot. Your foot positioning ideally should be hip width apart. So they're not perfectly together. They're not really wide. They can be. If you have tight hips, that's okay. But ideally, they're hip width apart. So however wide your hips are, that's where you place your feet. Same thing with your shoulders. However wide your shoulders are, that's where you place your hands. That's the ideal position. But using it, once they're in that position, you want to be driving your heels backwards with a quadriceps contraction, the muscles on the front of your thighs. You're going to contract these to press your heel backwards and locking, which will consequently lock your knees. So driving the feet back, and you think about pushing yourself forwards, but resisting it. You're not pushing yourself all the way forwards, but keeping that tension throughout your push-up exercises. So those are all the major structural position components. With each repetition, when it comes to range of motion, you want to go as low as you can, assuming you can do this without pain. If you can't hold these positions without pain, you shouldn't be doing them. You need to address those imbalances or injuries before moving on to using these exercise, strength and conditioning drills. But assuming that you can hold all of these positions without pain, when it comes to range of motion, how far down should we go? Obviously we covered before, you want to come up all the way to that fully locked position, elbows locked, shoulders packed. When you're descending, you want to go down as far as your range of motion allows, even if you get to the point where your chest touches the ground or comes in contact with the ground, and that's you can't go much further than that. If you have look at that, right here in my home gym. If you have a set of push-up handles, that's great. You can achieve a deeper range of motion, but you want to keep everything else constant. So look at that, I put them too wide. You want to keep these directly underneath your shoulders. You want to keep your elbows in tight, keeping your shoulders packed, and then you go down as far as you can maintain that without losing shoulder pack, without letting your elbows flare out, etc. So you go as far down as your range of motion allows, and that's going to be different for different people with different body types. Generally it's a good standard to be able to touch your sternum to the ground. So that's that. We'll talk about breathing now. There's different ways to breathe during a push-up exercise, but for most beginner and intermediate trainees, the optimal way is going to be to exhale during the effort portion. So whenever it's the hardest, that's when you exhale. This happens to be during the concentric portion of the exercise. So for most people, what you're going to do is lower yourself under control, make sure there's some air in your lungs, and then exhale upwards. And it can be a firm, strong exhalation, which can be done in combination with an abdominal contraction and that glute contraction to help tuck the tailbone underneath. It's all ties together. The breathing should aid and assist in the structure of the exercise. So let me just demonstrate a few reps for you. This is for most people. You notice I'm only exhaling actively, or I'm only paying attention to the exhale. I'm not, excuse me, I'm not actively inhaling air into my lungs, because if you allow yourself to inhale all that air into your lungs, you're going to over-oxygenate your blood. You're sucking in more than you really need. And so that's why it's important to relax your lungs. And you do this at the top position and during the descent. So what I mean by relaxing your lungs is allowing air to get sucked back in by relaxing your throat. And so we're in this top position, you relax the lungs. And relax them all the way down. Exhale. Relax the lungs. The inhale sucks itself back in automatically like a vacuum. Exhale. So you're exhaling as you're actually actively pushing into the ground. And when you are pushing into the ground, you're exhaling. You want to think about pressing the ground away from you. And if you were Chuck Norris, you would actually be doing this. You'd be pushing the earth away from you. But most of us aren't Chuck Norris, unfortunately. Some of us have red hair, though, like him. So that's just a good way to visualize or think about the proper way to, or the optimal way to press through the push-up range of motion. Because you're not just pressing yourself up to the top of push-up position. You're actually you're thinking of it as trying to move something, not just your body, but move something underneath you. Because your platform for pushing is underneath your hands and underneath your feet. So those are all the major components of the push-up exercise. If you follow all of those, then you're going to avoid all of the typical common mistakes that I see with push-ups. I touched on a couple of them. I'm not going to go over all of them because there's a lot. But that should really help you get started. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you apply it, because this is definitely the best way, the right way to do push-ups. And it's also known as the hard way to do push-ups, because people, if you do sloppy push-ups, it's usually because it feels easier initially, but you might be doing more harm than good. So I hope you use these techniques, and if you have any questions about them, please let me know. There's a lot more information about push-ups and bodyweight training and some programs at my website, physicalliving.com, and I hope you'll join me over there. All right, take care.